Welcome back, everyone, to our study on 2 Peter and Jude. We are in the epistle of 2 Peter in defense of the faith. And in 2 Peter, we're in the middle of a large pericope that is covering 2 Peter chapter 2, recognizing, understanding, and resisting the false teachers. And we've already looked at verses 1 through 12a in our bullet point list here. And now we are going to go on to the next one, which is beastly false teachers known for impurity. So this is part 9, 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 12b through 16. So if you want to pause the video here and read those verses to familiarize yourself, go right on ahead. All right, so the word like carries similarity in understanding, culminating into how they live. And the verse reads, "They are like unreasoning animals, creatures of instinct, born only to be caught and destroyed. And like animals, they too will perish." And then verse 13a, "They will be paid back with harm for the harm they have done." All right, so take note, we live how we think and perceive. All right, so Peter is drawing up this way of being able to identify these false teachers based on how they think and how they perceive things. How are they living out their so-called faith? And when we're able to identify what these ways of thinking that the false teachers have are, then we are going to be able to identify who the false teachers are. Now, it's easy for us because already ahead of time we know who exactly he's talking about. But for Peter and his audience, how are they going to identify who is an authentic teacher versus who is a false teacher? And Peter is saying it's how they think. It's how they perceive things. It's how, based off of that, it's how they're living out their lives. All right, which goes back to the question that I'm going to constantly ask throughout this whole study. Where did you hear this from? Where you're getting your information? What are your sources? In Greek, the word like, it also carries a nuance of with, implying they purposely are acting upon their instincts. All right, so what Peter is communicating is how and what these false teachers have lowered themselves to. They think they are better than angels, which we covered in the previous section. All right, so they've bolstered themselves up to say, yeah, we're great, we're more powerful than angels, but really they are as low as mere creatures, Peter says. And I'm convinced that he's hinting to the fact that they're probably worse than mere creatures, that they're even lower than mere creatures as we get further to the end of this section. All right, so sensuality of false teachers. Peter gives 8 reasons why the blackest darkness is reserved for the false teachers, as well as being paid back with harm for the harm they have done. And just to clarify, Peter does not say, here are 8 things. It's just there are 8 things that are identifiable that are reasons why these false teachers are destined for this blackest darkness and will be paid back for the harm that they've done. All right, so the first one, pleasure. Compare and contrast with what this means today. All right, so the verse reads, their idea of pleasure is to carouse in broad daylight. All right, they have this idea of pleasure. And what is that? First of all, if you take a moment and just pause and think, this could be negative or positive. All right, for example, do you take pleasure in God? Do you look forward to getting into Scripture? Do you plan ahead, like, hey, I'm going to fast over the weekend, take a time to just get away with just one-on-one with me and Jesus? You know, what kind of pleasures do you take in God? All right. Here, though, Peter is using the word pleasure in the negative, the Greek hedone, and that is where we get our word hedon, where we get the concept of, you know, the idea, the lifestyle of a hedonistic living, where it's just, I'm just going to seek after my own pleasures. And that is what Peter is saying of these false teachers. So their idea of pleasure is to carouse in broad daylight. So not only are they just, you know, seeking after these pleasures, but they're doing it in broad daylight. It's like they have absolutely no shame. Going back to the previous lesson, they don't care if people see what they do, because they justify it by saying, you know what, I'm one of the teachers. If this is what I teach, it means that it's okay. So what I'm doing is okay. And right there, Peter says, no, these are the beastly qualities of the false teachers. All right, so number 2, blots and blemishes. We're going to contrast that with chapter 3, verse 14. So first off, that verse in chapter 3 reads, "So then, dear friends, since you are looking forward to this, make every effort to be found spotless, blameless, and at peace with him." All right, our verse in chapter 2, in verse 13, it says they are blots and blemishes. All right, so let's compare these two. All right, Peter is saying, instead of being like that, be like this. Okay, so what he's saying is, don't be like this. All right, these blots. All right, and the word in the Greek is spilos, versus spotless in chapter 3 is spiloi. Sorry if I'm butchering the Greek. And then blemish, momos, versus blameless, emomotos. Again, I probably butchered that, so I apologize. But you could see very easily in the transliteration how very close these two words are. And he says these false teachers, their qualities are blots and blemishes, and instead be spotless and be blameless. Peter identifies these false teachers for who they are and tells his readers essentially, don't be like them. Okay? So number 2, blots and blemishes, don't be like that. Okay? If you've identified what these false teachers are like and what kind of a person they are, don't be like that. So what are we supposed to be like instead? Spotless and blameless. And the verse continues, and to be at peace with him, with Christ. Number 3, reveling. All right, they are blots and blemishes, reveling in their pleasures while they feast with you. Okay, reveling. They were mixing their own beliefs and agendas in with that of the believers. All right, for example, the love feast versus the Lord's Supper. All right, and you can on your own time look at 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And those first 3 bullet points there, under number 3, the love feast, covering 1 Corinthians chapter 11, 17 through 22, and then Paul goes into what the Lord's Supper is in verses 23 through 26, and then he writes about the importance of gathering together in the following verses right after that in 27 through 34. So have that in mind if you're going to go over 1 Corinthians chapter 11 in that section, okay? But for right now, the false teachers took this feast time as a chill time or to entertain themselves, perhaps using these moments to take advantage of others. All right, and we'll get to that a little bit more in number 5 below. All right, so what these feasts are used for, Peter's saying that the false teachers are using them for quite a different use. Okay, maybe for example, they're using these opportunities to have these feasts to gather these people together. Some of the so-called weaker Christians, the weaker believers, the unstable ones, in order to condition them. All right, come to these feasts. It's a good thing. These are the love feasts. This is part of the Lord's Supper, mixing things together and luring them in order to take advantage of them. And all the while they are reveling. All right, what does this word reveling mean? Let me pull it up real quick. To live luxuriously. All right, riot or revel, okay? What Peter's getting at is that not only do they flaunt certain things that they do, but they make it evident that, hey, everything must be great because look at the riches that I have. All right, look at all the stuff that I'm able to obtain. That obviously means that I'm a great and good person. All right, if I could live luxuriously, that means that you should listen to me then, Now, that is not to say that if you do have the means to live in a luxurious life, I'm not saying that you're a false teacher or that you're sinful or anything like that. But what I will say is that if you're going to use these luxurious means for your own agenda like these false teachers are doing, then yeah, we need to realign ourselves with why God has blessed us with certain riches. We live in a country that, we can just go to the grocery store and get the food that we need. Whereas a lot of places around the world, they don't have that easy go-to, all right, if at all, okay? What these false teachers are doing are saying, I have this luxurious life and it's okay to live according to how I want to live. Where Peter is contrasting, saying, hey, that's the beastly way of living instead of living after Christ. All right, so number 4, eyes aglow. The language of Peter here is dulled down a lot too. All right, with eyes full of adultery. These teachers are addicted to sex. They're always looking for loose women, as the REB translates. As they look, any woman could be a candidate, whether a part of their crowd or a part of the Christians or anyone else. All right, so what Peter is getting across here is that you could see in their eyes. It's been taught that the eyes are the window to the soul. But what Peter is getting at here is that when they are using their eyes, it's not because they're looking for anything to be able to use that luxurious life for others, or looking to see if there are any people that are in need. What they're doing is targeting certain people, these loose women, to get what they want out of them. Okay, and they're going to use their prestige, they're going to use their position in order to do that. Now, I mean, we look into it today and we see, does that kind of stuff happen? Unfortunately, it does. Maybe not as much as what Peter is getting at here, because he seems very, very colorful in the language that he uses here to describe what these false teachers are doing. But nevertheless, it happens. All right, so what are these eyes of these false teachers doing? They're getting in this tunnel vision. They're getting these crosshairs going to aim at whatever they can aim at to fulfill their own desires, their beastly desires. All right, we can go into compare these other verses. You can do this on your own in 1 Corinthians chapter 6:18, James 4:7, and 1 Peter 5:8-9. And compare it with what Peter is communicating here about the eyes full of adultery. They never stop sinning. They seduce the unstable. All right, so number 5, they seduce the unstable. Here, Peter begins his description of their methods or teaching rather than moral stances. All right, so seduce. This term is rooted in the world of hunting and fishing. For example, the lure, the bait, or the trap. All right, and another example, see James 1:14. All right, so just think of that image that he's drawing up, that if they have these other people that are easily seduced, all they need is that certain bait. They need to just use the right words. Perhaps look at them in a certain way. Give that nice smile, whatever it might be. Whatever the bait is, they seek out what it is and use it accordingly. All right, these are what the false teachers will do to seduce. The unstable. Who are the unstable Peter refers to? Recall Peter's teaching in chapter 1, verse 12, being firmly established in the truth. Peter subtly reminds them of this truth, to be established in the truth, okay? As we look at what the false teachers are like, yeah, we need to know the truth so we are not easily seduced or become unstable to the point that we could be taken advantage of. Those unstable that fall prey to the false teachers have not been established in the truth. All right, number 6, they are experts in greed. All right, and that's how the verse reads, they are experts in greed. The NIV lacks an underlining explanation here that they have been trained in their greed, right? Or the King James Version says exercised. This greed here is a broad term. It is likely Peter was not just thinking greed for money or possessions, but also whatever else the false teachers lust after. All right, greed doesn't always have to do with money or belongings or having the best of the best, the most upgraded phone or donkey for Peter's age. But here it could also mean, if he's talking about how they're seducing certain people into sexual gratification, that greed may also go into that realm as well. What other forms of greed are there? Greed is all about, what can I get for myself? How can these things fulfill me? It's all a selfish outtake on how to live. All right, and then number 7, an accursed brood. And that's exactly how the verse reads. And it is literally children of curse, a child or children of wrath, people on whom God's wrath rests, Ephesians 2:3, or a child or children of light, people characterized by light, 1 Thessalonians 5:5. Peter again names them, attributing their destiny to who they are. All right, these are children of the wrath. All right, they're an accursed brood. What if they take under different people under their wings and start discipling them in their ways? What happens there? They create more children, according to this brood, children of curse. So it just continues and continues and continues. Where does that cycle end? We need to know the identity of these false teachers in order to say, this teaching is not right, okay? And then number 8, they have left the straight way and wandered off to follow the way of Balaam, son of Beor, or the Greek translation of Beor is Bezer. I don't understand why. That's just how it's pronounced. All right, so the way is marking their practice as a philosophy or a religion after Balaam, though not directly. It is ironic, the similarities, but not ironic, the outcomes. All right, and wandered off, see Deuteronomy chapter 11, 26 through 28. And as far as the way of Balaam, Balaam rejected what God said to do and did his own thing. A donkey even knew better and saw the angel of the Lord where Balaam did not. Balaam ended up blessing Israel instead of cursing them as Balak, king of Moab, wanted him to. And for more on Balaam's way, see Numbers 25 and 31:16. All right, but what Peter writes here in verse 15, they have left the straight way and wandered off to follow the way of Balaam, son of Bezer, who loved the wages of wickedness, but he was rebuked for his wrongdoing by a donkey, an animal without speech, who spoke with a human voice and restrained the prophet's madness. All right, so Peter's drawing up this he further develops this illustration by saying, these false teachers are like beasts. But then he says, even the donkey, who was a beast, had more sense. This donkey was able to communicate the truth of what this prophet should do, even though this prophet still didn't listen. Even when this beastly animal still spoke, they have that same mindset that they're like this beastly things, but even an actual real natural beast has more sense than these false teachers. This is what he's drawing up. All right, so these are the 8 characteristics of the sensuality of the false teachers. All right, so coming into today's teachers and prophets, James 3:2 reads, "We all stumble in many ways." All right, we can so easily be duped into understanding something that and be convinced that it's true because it has this certain nuance to it, or it gives me a nice ooey gooey good feeling inside. But we can so all of us can so easily be duped into believing something as true that actually is not. Coming back to, where are you getting your sources from? Where you're getting your information from? What's your sources? We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. And what these false teachers that Peter is writing about, he's saying what they're teaching, they could not keep their bodies in check. What they're living out, they're not checking on. All right. So James is writing, we all stumble. Okay. So as a result, we should probably check ourselves quite often. Okay. When we are unsure of the teaching, the lifestyle often proves helpful. Going back to 1 Peter's thesis, live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. All right, how are we living out our lives according to the truth? And are we analyzing ourselves based off of where we get this information off of? All right, we need to fill our lives with the truth. And recall chapter 1, verses 5 through 9 and 12 through 15. All right, going into devotional life. 2 Peter chapter 2:19 says, they promised them freedom, talking about the false teachers again. They promised them freedom while they themselves are slaves of depravity. For people are slaves to whatever has mastered them. And then James chapter 5:19 through 20, my brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring that person back, remember this: whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. We need to be that person that is willing to disrupt all relational ties to people to save them from the error of their way. All right. Also, we also need to be the people that if somebody comes to us and says, hey, where are you getting this from? What is the source of this so-called truth that you're presenting us? We need to be humble enough and meek enough to say, you know what, let's together look through this and go through how I came about finding this truth. And hopefully it's coming from Scripture, and hopefully it's through a proper exegetical interpretation of how we find that truth in Scripture. And this brings us to questions for discussion. What does Peter equate these false teachers to? Are there any of these 8 beastly qualities you can recognize in yourself, in teachings you have heard? How does the believer's conduct prove to be important when teaching truth? What responsibility do we have when false teachings are evident? All right, and thank you for joining in on this lesson, and I hope to see you out there, and have a great day. God bless.